many of them in their early 20s. What would Ankur Warikoo be telling his 20-year-old self?
That's a great question to start with. What I realized, Rahul, that in my 20s I made a lot of decisions, and most of these decisions had no basis. They were either impositions by society or my own biases about my own self. And those decisions tend to be the worst ones because you think you're making a decision, but you actually aren't. You're just choosing what your desires are and converted that into a decision. So if I could go back in time and advise the 20-year-old Ankur, I would say whatever decision you take, whether it's right or wrong, doesn't matter. Just take it from a point of awareness. You should know what are the choices in front of you so that the choice you make is driven by your own judgment of what's right for you, irrespective of whether it's going to work out for you or not. And that does require you to be a little deliberate and not be like going with the flow. Log kar rahe hain to kar lo, dunya keh rahi hai to kar lo. It is more about what do I want to do, why do I want to do this, and thus just the choice that you make.
Let's spend a moment on content creation. There are so many people sitting here who would love to be content creators, find some way of turning those reels or YouTube videos into a means of sustenance. Everybody can't do it.
Yeah.
Some like you have. What are the lessons you learned along the way? If you were consulting for someone who wants to be a content creator and make an earning out of it,
Sure.
what's your crash?
Number one, I believe everyone can do it. It genuinely is an open playing platform for everybody, and it's been democratized to the extent that it hasn't been so. And that was a shout out for someone who agreed. There are three things that I would say. Number one, which is the most important, is you need to decide what you're going to talk about. It cannot be about what the audience wants to listen. And that's a big conflict because a lot of people want to create content jo janta sunna chahti hai. But then you become part of the competitive environment where everyone is trying to create content for them. It's like everyone wants to sell credit cards to people who already have a credit card. Doesn't work. So please decide what is it that you are passionate about. And it could be, frankly, anything at all. And start creating content there. So that's step number one. Step number two is by virtue of that, figure out who is it that's listening to you. Because that will be your self-selection. So I often say this, don't try and impress people. Do your work and see who gets impressed by it. Because that's your tribe. That's who you want to speak to. And then number three, which is the biggest thing in content, is be consistent at that for at least a year and a half, 2 years. Which is the hardest piece because people don't want that. They want overnight success. Rato raat koi reel
So you write
viral ho
about a
jaye.
period where almost for 4 years you were doing videos and nobody was watching.
Absolutely.
And yet you somehow had the courage to stick to your guns and just do what you were doing.
I don't think it was courage. It was just the passion of wanting to speak and express about what I felt passionately about. If I was trying to create content for them, I would opt out after 6 months after no seeing any progress. But because I was passionate about what I was talking about, I was like, I don't care who's listening in. Because even if 300 people come and watch that video, I will be wild if 300 random people walked into my house and listened to me speak for 10 minutes. So why would I dismiss those 300 people who came to my YouTube video and clicked like on it because they felt connected to what I said?
What's most amazing about Ankur is the fact that he speaks so candidly about his failures. Most people would like to present this facade of someone who's uber successful, and even if they failed, it's something they'd rather stay silent about. They tom-tom their successes, stay silent about their failures. Let's go through some of your failures and talk about what they taught you. And what stood out to me was when you take over the Indian operations of Nearby, try and run that, you've got a whole big team that you're responsible for, and that goes bust. Why do you think it went wrong? In hindsight, what did you learn from it?
So for context, in 2015, we bought over the India operations of Groupon, which is what I was heading until then, and made it into Nearby. And that became an independent entity. We raised money and a whole lot of money. And the biggest mistake that I made as a founder CEO was to believe that the product was all ready, it was brilliant, and all that we needed was visibility and people to get to know of us. So just pump all that money into marketing and just pay through the attention that you could. Clearly didn't work because the product wasn't ready. And that had this domino effect where we struggled to make money. We, of course, made some bad choices. We had to lay off people. And all of that was a stark reminder yet again that if you do not know how to cover your blind spots and you don't have people around you who will call out your bullshit and tell you that this is possibly wrong, you're going to live and be happily living ever after in your cocoon and not see the world come crashing down. And that hit me really hard. It changed me as an individual. And we, of course, went back, course-corrected. We thankfully still continue to survive. We're profitable. We're nearly not as big as we thought we would be. But the biggest lesson that I learned from that exercise was everyone has blind spots. And you need to always have people who are calling you out on those blind spots, because it's impossible for you, at least at that point, to look at those and make sense of the real world.
That's very important. That's a good lesson there. The other thing that Ankur talks about now, I just want to tell everyone sitting here that if you have a question you want to ask Ankur, you can do that. Not just now, just think of your question. In a few minutes, we'll make this interactive and you can throw in your question. What you write about in your book is different leadership styles for different people. That don't try and lead everyone the same way. And that I think is interesting, because everyone typically has a particular leadership style that they think works for them, and they try and then implement that across teams. You have a different approach. Lead different people differently. Talk about that.
So it comes from a very common philosophy in life that at scale, it's very easy to look at people as data points on an Excel sheet and not as people. But every day when someone shows up at work, there is a certain motivation to do that. It could be money, it could be acknowledgement, it could be growth, it could be fame, it could be anything whatsoever. And if you do not attend to that motivation, you're essentially just trying to lead everybody with the same yield that you have. And that may work for somebody because it's directly in line with what their motivation is, but it may be in direct conflict with what they wish to serve and how. And that's when I realized in business, the hardest thing to scale should be leadership. Leadership should not become easier as you grow as a company. So if anyone comes to me and says, hey, I have a big team now and it's so easy to manage that team, red flag. Because it should be by design harder and harder to lead people as you have more and more people coming in. That requires a lot of investment of time, emotional energy, your, of course, physical bandwidth, but most importantly, it requires you to get into their shoes and even try and comprehend, why do they show up at work every day? What is their key driver to do so? And it's wrong to assume that it is one thing for everyone. It isn't. But the minute you do that, it just unlocks things, because then people feel heard. And when people feel heard, they will give your entire life to that.